Okay, let's get started. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education's Zoom platform. We're so pleased and grateful to have you all here tonight. Before we dive into collecting forward and the discussion that our wonderful artists are going to have, I just want to quickly share a little bit more about the museum. The Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education explores the legacy of the Jewish experience in Oregon, teaches the enduring and universal relevance of the Holocaust, and provides opportunities for intercultural conversations. We have a robust programming schedule, which includes artist talks like these, curator talks, book talks, film screenings, all kinds of fun artist workshops as well, and the return of the Portland Jewish Film Festival, which kicks off next month. This exhibition closes January 12th, so you have a little more time to come see it if you haven't already. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our artists. So Emily, please take it away. And thank you all again for being here tonight.
I'm going to do the play from start thing. Does that work? Does that look good? Okay. Hi, my name is Emily Ginsberg, and I'm going to do a little introduction and then talk about some of my work. I was born in New York and I grew up in Baltimore. I've been in Portland since the early 90s and have been teaching at PNCA, Pacific Northwest College of Art, for over 34 years now. My undergrad degree was in art history from Trinity College, and my MFA was in printmaking at Cranbrook Academy of Art. I've shown nationally and internationally and done residencies and all that kind of good stuff. Most recent solo show was at Southeast Cooper Contemporary, and I did a great residency at Haystack last summer. So I'm enjoying doing and making. I'm both a conceptually driven artist, deeply enamored with materials and processes. I work across various media, from work on paper to textiles, print media, installation, public art, video, sound, animation, painting, and sculpture. Thematically, my ideas have been around communication and psychological and social dynamics in everyday life. This evolving series of sculptures that you're seeing in this first slide is from a series called Metabolic, and it's really focusing on simultaneous senses of decline and resilience, debris and glitch, the emergent and new relics. As a bridge from the work that's in the Collecting Forward exhibition, which is a particular investigation of media signals and patterns, these sculptures that you're looking at now appear wrapped or adorned with some of the same media patterns, but it's just part of a wider visual vocabulary. These sculptures are made with upcycled clay to create time capsules that reflect the complex process of synthesizing everyday experiences. I'm mining the stimuli from media systems, as I did in the transmission piece in the museum, but they're also informed by references to geography, geology, food, plants, domestic spaces, and biology, amongst others. I'm really fascinated by how these visual and psychological entanglements meet bodily systems and function. The past few months, I've been toggling between staring and picking at ceramic sculptures in progress and accumulating a large collection of works on paper with acrylic that relate to my sculptural concerns. For now, I'm just really enjoying ways of conjuring forms and bringing some of the same formal concerns and senses of tactility and surface and gesture. And I wonder how they're going to inform the sculptural works that I'm doing. And that's my brief share.
Thank you so much, Emily. Next, Stu is going to share a little bit about his work.
Sure, let's see if I can get this up and running. Now let's get to, excuse me while I find my PowerPoint. Is that showing up?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. So I'm Stu Levy. I've been in Portland for 50 years. I started photographing in high school, but eventually went to medical school, came here for internship and residency and a career in medicine, which was half time to let me photograph. But I'm going to give an overview of my photo life, as it were. One of the earliest photos that I'm going to show here is something that I took in high school of a young Jewish folk singer, um, Bob Dylan, 1965. Fast forward several years, I started backpacking, became aware of the landscape, um, got exposed to Ansel Adams photos at the Art Museum here in Portland, and I said, I want to learn how to make a print like that. Ended up at Ansel's workshop in the late 70s. He liked my work, and he asked me to be an assistant instructor at his workshops every summer for the next 4 or 5 years. Um, I started making photographs in the black and white tradition that were very pristine. They were of an unpeopled landscape, um, almost timeless in a sense. This is Havasu Stream in Arizona, Punchbowl Falls here in the Columbia Gorge, Ramona Falls on Mount Hood, and a piece of the sand dunes on the Oregon coast. And I usually don't title my photos other than place and date, but this one got a nickname, which is somewhat biblical, which is the burning bush. In 2009, I was asked to show at the Oregon Jewish Museum, especially if I had anything that related to anything Jewish, and I really didn't. But in brainstorming, I said, well, I've photographed in the Jewish cemetery in Prague before, so maybe I'll photograph in the Jewish cemeteries in Portland. And I recruited Carol Isaac, who is Rabbi Daniel Isaac's wife, as a photographic partner in the project. And so these are a few of the photos from that project. This is the gravesite of Oregon Governor Meyer from the 1800s, the gravesite of Stuart Alpert, who was a social activist in the 1960s. I'm not sure whose grave this is, but this combined the landscape and sort of sky phenomena um, interest that I have in making images. And this is the photograph of Harvey Clevitt, and I'll talk about this later on. But again, it combines the sky phenomena, the light, the composition, etc. Several years later, I went to Morocco, to the town of Fez, and saw a sign saying essentially Jewish cemetery. And I went in, and these are the graves in the Jewish cemetery in Morocco, which is a vastly different um, type of structure from what I was used to. Another view of the cemetery. But while I was in Morocco, I went to a town in the north called Chefchaouen. It's also known as the Blue City. During the Spanish Inquisition, 1492, when Jews left Spain, one of the closest places they could go to was Morocco. So a big Jewish settlement happened in the northern part of Morocco. And I'm told that they painted their walls blue to remind them of spirituality and of the heavens. And so as I went there photographing, I said to myself, I can't photograph these in black and white. And that sort of opened me up to photographing in color. And um, again, that liberated me, and the connection of the Judaism to the place was important to me. Then I started, well, then in the mid 80s, I started photographing collage-like images that didn't represent a single point of time. And there are some people on the bottom of these. This is actually a self-portrait. But I went on to photograph people in a cinematic type of sense. It's as if I were making a movie of someone, and we remembered one frame from one scene and another frame from another scene and combined them, even though they didn't happen in the same place or the same time. This in particular is 25 different photographs made, and part of them are made in two different rooms, 8 or 9 months apart, but it's as if we're looking at a single scene of the person. This is former Portland Mayor Bud Clark, and I'm responding to the poster in which he was a subject, called Expose Yourself to Art, and I call this Re-Expose Yourself to Art. Gordon Gilkey, who is a printmaker and curator at the Portland Art Museum. Hank Pander, wonderful Portland painter, and I'll talk about this later, which is also part of the exhibit. And then just a couple other photos that I've made just to give a little taste of what else I do. So that's it for my intro.
Thank you so much, Stu. All right, next up we have Daniela.
Hi, thanks for being here, everybody. Okay. So this is a view into a little bit of how my work begins and how I share my work. I'm a visual artist, a poet, and a pigment maker and a teacher. So this is a photograph that a student took of a lineup of things that could become pigments or have already been made into pigments. What you see here are rocks and bones. You don't see any flowers, but a lot of my pigments are also made of flowers and different earths and different waters. So my work deals primarily with memory, and I think of pigment making as a way to access the Earth's memory. This is another view into a little bit of what I'm up to, the behind the scenes view of my work. You can see in the back there a bunch of pigments on the wall, and then the circular pieces behind me in this photograph of a former studio of mine, not my current studio, are actually all pigments from the Willamette Valley. So a lot of what I make are what I think of as portraits of landscapes, portraits of place, pigments of place. And in making these works, I am both excavating and asking questions of and trying to befriend my own memories, both those that stem from my own life and those that I've inherited, as well as the memories of the places that I'm in. In the foreground of this photo, you also see some blue circular images. Those are cyanotypes that I made when I was in the Arctic recently. A lot of my work centers on thinking about how the Earth is changing. So that obviously encompasses climate change and other types of rapid ecological change. Just to bring you really briefly through the pigment process, and also to orient you a little bit to the ways that my work overlaps with Jewish themes. What you see on the far end, far left of the screen there is a field in Płaszów, which is a former concentration camp in Poland. And they're weeds. Those are basically just flowering weeds. The next photo to the right is those weeds picked and put into a pot with some water from the Wisła River in Krakow. Next, you see a workshop in Krakow where I'm transforming those flowers into pigment. The next photo is those pigments drying on coffee filters. And then you see an image of the dried pigments being ground up in mortars and pestles. And this was all done, you don't see any humans in this photo, but this was all done in community, which is also part of how I try to make my work. And then those pigments are, many of them are on the bottom row of this image. So what you're looking at here is sort of what I think of as an archive of places, places that are significant to me in the intergenerational memories they hold from my own familial life. The memories that these places hold ecologically, the deep time memories they hold, and the ways that they're forming new memories in how they're so rapidly changing. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Daniela. Okay, next up, Esther is going to introduce herself.
Esther, do you want to turn on your video?
Yeah, go ahead and turn it on and oh, start my video. Okay, here we go. I haven't all right. So this is a piece that is similar to the one that is well, first I'll introduce myself. I'm Esther Podemsky, and I moved to I came to Portland when I was 6 years old with my family when immigration barriers lifted for Jews in 1952. And I lived in Portland um, until 1986, at which time I moved to New York. But I have deep roots in Portland and a large extended family there. So I'm frequently in Portland, or I was more so in the past. But at any rate, this is a similar piece to the one that to one of the pieces exhibited at in the show, and I did a whole series of these, um, and they're drawn with Sumi ink, and you can barely see the soldiers in the background, but those are uh, made with digital. It's a digital collage of soldiers. Next slide. Um, this is this is my work is influenced by the three films I've made over the course of I don't know how many years, but the film this film is called House of the World. It's a 54-minute film shot in Poland on 16 millimeter film, and this is called Survivors Return 1945. These are people who returned to my father's town after liberation. But it's also a picture, oddly enough, of my parents' marriage. But they're not the people sitting in chairs. My mother's the third person from the right, my father's standing next to her. So the film was this large sort of library of images. And I was very influenced in terms of painting and drawing of images uh, that were rather abstracted, not illustrated of the events of the war, such as steam and clouds, and which relates once again to the piece, the other piece that's exhibited in the show. Next slide. Um, After I made that film, I made another film with a working partner called 5 Days in July. 5 Days in July is a dual screen film or projection. And it has one soundtrack, but it has two images on the screen at the same time. The soldiers that were introduced into the drawings that I made with Sumi ink and digital collage were I came to mind as a result of the National Guard invasion of Newark. Newark was the second, well, it was one of the first, but after Watts, it was one of the second major riots during the Summer of Love in 1967, which was a kind of ironic, I don't know, an ironic historical collision. Okay, next slide. This is called the allegory of, this comes from a fresco in Siena. And it is one of the features in another film I made, which is which was a 47-minute documentary shot in Italy. Emily will recognize this because I believe she did a residency in Siena. And this is called The Good City Republic. The film features a peasant, a priest, and this fresco. And the fresco is a three-part fresco, and it is the first secular fresco ever made. It's a political manifesto about the importance of citizenship and the maintenance of a republic. And it illustrates how care of the land is reflected in the condition of the city. And I was very influenced, not so much in making paintings and drawings, I was not so much influenced by the imagery in the film, but what I discovered in the post-production process, which was uh, in the post-production process, every single frame of the film has to be color corrected. And it's a certain kind of software that's superimposed on each frame. And the result of that, of looking at that vector that was superimposed, that software on an individual frame, influenced these drawings that I've been making ever since. This is a drawing that is called Flying Into Myself, which I made a couple years ago. It's a digital print that comes from outputting this vector over the frame, manipulating it in Photoshop, and then transferring it to a print. And then with that print, I worked on it with collage, water-based paint. It's on paper. It's 15 by 22 inches. And as I said, it was completed a couple of years ago. Next slide. This is the last piece I'm showing, and it's actually well, it's called Embrace. It's a oil on shaped wood panel, and I've done a lot of these recently. It's it's one of the most recent pieces, and um, it's shaped on a wood panel and painted with oil paint. And I'm pursuing these shape pieces currently. So that's kind of an overview of my work, and the influences that led me to the pieces that are in the show.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much. Thanks so much, Esther. Okay, and last but not least, we have Tad.
Hi, I'm Tad Savinar. I'm a visual artist primarily, born and raised in Portland, Oregon. I've been a practicing visual artist for 53 years. And I show on a semi-regular basis at PDX Contemporary in Portland. I have this image up because that is my current state. My work tends to be to report on the human condition, to offer a kind of a shorthand journalism on political issues, social issues, natural issues, human issues that I encounter. And once I encounter, I want to ask other people around me if they feel this way too. So my works are very sharply graphic, very clean, as opposed to, I think, a lot of the artists on this discussion. I am not a process person. I am primarily an idea person, and then once I have an idea, then the question is, what am I going to make it out of? This is at the core of my work in that in the beginning, first few decades of studio work, if I couldn't make it with my own hands, then I didn't make it. So my skills intersected with my wishes, and there were lots of works that I had ideas for, but I couldn't, I didn't have the talent, shall we say, or the skills. In 1980, I got pulled into the theater world and was involved in a play that started here in Portland as an art performance and then went to New York off Broadway and then went to New York Broadway and then was made into a movie. And as a result of that being dragged along through that whole process, I started to realize that in theater, there is a scenic designer, there is a costume designer, there's actors, directors, sound person, lots of people involved. They're all trying to do complete one thing, but they all are using their talents to get to that end result. And so it dawned on me that my visual work could actually be made by others. If I could provide the script, as it were, or the directions, or the drawings, or the description of what I wanted made, then clearly I could open up my toolbox for the work that I wanted to make. And that was in the early 80s, or well, it was mid 80s. And that was a great gift to me, because now, since then, when I have an idea for a work, I ask myself, is this a t-shirt? Is it a bumper sticker? Is it an oil painting? Is it a cast bronze sculpture? Is it a digital print? Is it a drawing? Or, and proceed to actually use the media that I think will be the most forthcoming for that content. So often my exhibitions look like a group show around a theme, because there'll be a few bronzes, there'll be a painting, there'll be some drawings, some prints, rather than sticking with one kind of media-based interpretation. And so I feel very fortunate to have made this discovery, and I continue to use that. I guess I'll stop right there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tad. Okay, now we are going to have each one of you go around and just share a little more about the specific piece or pieces that you have in the exhibition. Maybe share a little backstory about what inspired their creation, and if you know it, how it came to be in the museum's collection. And with that, Emily is going to take us away again.
Okay. So what's the backstory on this is that this is part of a body of work that emerged out of kind of fatigue compute with working digitally and dealing with digital fabrication in my work, and but still kind of holding a deep fascination for the media patterns, analog and digital, that we rely on for communication, and really wanting to take those kind of codes and signals and bring them and translate them through my own hand, like to bring that materiality and physicality back into my work, into my relationship to exploring ideas around communication. This is part of, like, I guess there were over 50 plus exploratory experimental works on paper from this size. They're like 30 by 44 that I did over 2017 to 2019. I worked on a lot of these at the same time, really layering up with paint, really not kind of drawing or designing them, just kind of going at them in a very instinctive way and letting them build up, not being precious. They got quite heavy. Paper is really forgiving, and I love that about paper. And parallel works from this period took the form of a billboard scale installation and a series of paintings as well. To put it in context of, kind of history, or a little bit, that this also coincided, my sort of need for physicality and materiality tied to communication kind of was in the backdrop of the Trump administration and increased challenges in making sense out of information on fundamental levels. And that was just kind of a level of absurdity and confusion that I was wrestling with. And I was really thinking about all different kinds of sources, media sources, and ways we communicate, from cell phones to newspapers to TV and social media, streamed content, like different ways we author and witness these phenomena. And, kind of, again, sort of remaking these machine generated kind of images and modular kind of forms was a way to sort of be playful and absurd, in sort of trying to make sense out of the call and response signals we get in everyday life. And so they're really just meant to be kind of noise pieces in a way. And uh, that language and that aesthetic vocabulary has kind of carried through into sculptural work, kind of expanding those themes. So that's something about that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Emily. I appreciate that explanation because I can really feel it when I look at it. I'm going to go downstairs and check it out more. Okay, Stu, you're up next. Thank you.
Okay, so there's two images I'm going to talk about. The first on the left is the photograph of Harvey Clevett's grave in the Ahavai Shalom Cemetery. Um, I approached photographing the cemeteries as I approach my general landscape photos, looking at the form, at the sky, at the lighting situations, and basically stumbled across Harvey's grave. And Harvey is someone who I had worked with in my medical career at Kaiser. So it was somebody who I knew and felt like that I could honor in this way. And I just love the clouds above it that are sort of poofing up and not quite exploding, but just feel somewhat celebratory over his grave. And again, that's part of the series that I did on the Oregon Jewish cemeteries. But the photo on the right, which may be a little bit hard to see in this, is a photograph of the painter Hank Pander. It's made of 15 separate images, each made with a 4x5 inch camera. And I don't know if there's anybody not familiar with Hank, but he was a painter. He moved to Portland in the 60s from Amsterdam. He had grown up under Nazi occupation. Um, he um, he photographed these fantastic scenes of disasters from my perspective. I used to joke that he painted still deaths as opposed to still lives. But this was in his prior studio in the end of the 90s. I think this is in 1999. And what I was struck with was the sense of light coming through his windows that almost made him look Rembrandtish, and his space Rembrandtish. But he's sort of in the near left. It's impossible to see in this image, but there's an area next to the window in the left where I'm actually hiding behind the curtains. But then he's painting a still life in the center. But the image goes on to the right panels where there's a giant painting of the wreck of the new Carissa on the Oregon coast that he had painted. There's another painting that's about 8 feet square called Waiting, which has to do with the death of Rick Young. Rick Young, who had been the director of the Storefront Theater, and Hank had been the artistic director there. But the painting is of Rick essentially dying of AIDS in the intensive care unit at the old Best Kaiser Hospital. So it was a place I was familiar with also. And in the lower right, he's actually reviewing a bunch of love letters that his mother had sent to his father before they were married that were in Dutch, and he's translating them and reading them while he's taking breaks from painting. So this is sort of an image trying to describe several facets of Hank's daily routine as an artist. And as part of my grid portrait series, this is published in a book of grid portraits that is available in the gift shop right now, if anybody wants to take a look at that. But that's basically the grid portraits, a multi-faceted view of an individual over time.
That's great. Thank you so much, Stu. Next, we're going to have Daniela explain her pieces.
Thanks. So I'll start actually with desire lines, which is on the right. And this piece is part of a series named after a type of, it's a sociological term actually. A desire line is a path that follows the shortest or easiest route between an origin and a destination. So if you've ever been walking in a city where everything is gridded and you see a path that cuts across a square, that is a desire line. And I became fascinated with how frequently these types of paths occur. and the ways that they are sort of gently subversive to the ways that we are supposed to be walking or supposed to be moving. So the series is inspired by that predilection for getting to a place, and a desire to connect to wherever we're headed. More broadly, it's about this sense of interdependence that I think we are all inherently seeking out, despite these really strong cultural messages in this country that guide us again and again towards independence. Um, the painting is made from, it's on paper and it's made from rocks and bones and flowers, and all of these things are sourced from specific places. The water is also sourced from a specific place. This particular painting is sourced from the bioregion of Southeast Oregon, also known as the Oregon Outback, a place where I've spent a lot of time teaching and wandering and following the desire lines of both humans and other than human species. And this piece is really, it's a very joyful piece for me. There's other pieces in this series that I think of as heavier or more contemplative. This piece really felt in the at the tail end of the isolation times of the pandemic is when this piece was made, and it really sort of felt like this celebration of connection. The one more thing I'll say about this work is that one of the binders, usually I'm using water as a binder for the pigments, but one of the binders in this one is eggs. And that obviously, eggs have so many symbolism in Jewish ritual and also in general cultural meaning. And one of the things that they do when you combine them with pigments and put them on paper is they create this really strong cohesive property. So in the making of this series, all of the Desire Lines paintings have eggs in them. The pigments are really seeking each other out on the paper, which I find to be really fun to work with this sort of desire of the pigments and the mediums themselves. Echo Zero Stone on the left is a more recent series, same year, but different times in each year. And this piece and this series deals, same pigments are being used here, stones, flowers, wild waters, and bones. But this piece deals more specifically with memory. I think of every piece in this series is made of circles, and I think of these circles as representations of ecosystems. I think of them as representations of ecosystems linked. As you can see in the painting, there's a lot of overlap of shapes and colors and tones. I also think of them as stones, which is obviously the embodiment of Jewish mourning, that we put a stone on a Jewish grave. And I think of them as zeros. At the time that I was making this painting, I was having a prolonged written exchange with a close friend who is also Jewish and also an artist and was making work about memory. And we kept arriving back at the zero, which is a longer story than I have time for right now. But these paintings are all about like arriving back at this source and some of the numerology of the Kabbalah, and thinking about how to love across time and space and how to love backwards towards our ancestral inheritance.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniela. Okay, next Esther will explain her pieces.
So you're gonna have to turn your video on.
Mute.
Esther.
Okay, so the piece on the left, I mean, I've already sort of talked about some of the influences in terms of this dual screen film that I made in the early and in about 2007. But there are a couple of major influences that are really important to me, and one of them is Bruce Conner, particularly those astonishing ink blot drawings that are so incredibly mysterious. And just there's no, you just can't tell how he did it. They're just so incredible. And that was a big motivation for me to really develop drawings with Sumi ink that was very controlled and very specific. And I used an inventory of my own drawings that I had already sort of accumulated, and um, along with other references to Picabia in his silhouette, his drawings of silhouettes. Picabia was a very he was a very controversial figure in the history of art, but I admire his work because he tried everything. The piece on the right, I've also explained in terms of the influence from the film. It comes from an archival source, and it was taken from a longer story that was told by one of my uncles about a mutiny that occurred in a work camp where he was interned, and where he saw a mutiny of German soldiers coming from the front, and at the same time in a train, and at the same time soldiers who were returning from the Russian front, and they battled between them. And the people at the work camp, because they had witnessed this mutiny, were told to. They were made to stand naked in the snow, and many of them died. So that I neutralized the story by constructing an image that came from the film, but that appealed to me. And one objective here was to convey movement. I just want to say something about the piece on the left, which is the importance of the paper. The paper is Kojo paper, and it's a Korean paper. And there are intervals there of lines that go across that helps to structure the drawing. The paper is originally made in such a way that you're supposed to take these lines apart and use them as hinges for prints or for framing pieces, and it's very fragile. And I did many of these drawings over the course of a number of years. And this one, sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. This was completed in 2016, so I was referencing the election of Donald Trump. Anyway, I think that's about it in terms of these two pieces.
That's great. Thank you, Esther. Okay, and Tad going to introduce his pieces.
Thank you. I donated or submitted 3 works to the Jewish Museum's collection committee for inclusion in their collection. And there are 3 of those in the show. The 3 that I submitted, the first one, which is not pictured here, was 7 years into my career. The kind of turquoise colored a metaphor on the bottom of this image was 30 years into my career, and the new beginning on the left was 46 years. I thought it would be interesting to show a span of work, but I also think it's interesting, as I said earlier in my introduction, that often my work looks like it's done by multiple different artists, or it's a group show. The one on the bottom is pretty straightforward. I don't know at this scale if you can really read the image, but it does chart a path as to someone's lifetime in the objects that are used for conveyance. So on the far left, we have the crib, and there's the stroller, and then the school bus, et cetera. And, we tend to end up on a gurney. The red dot, of course, indicating you are here. And so this is really typical in my work in the here's what I think, where do you think you are? Kind of question. The piece on the left-hand corner is a direct lift of the famous painting of Betty Ross and her friends sewing up the first American flag. But what I did is I flipped the image and kind of Rorschached it so it has a mirror image to the right, and I put them together through a digital work. So it's really, there are two groups of people sewing the flag, and the group on the right, I have colored their skin to be that of Black and Hispanic or other colors of human beings. And this, oddly enough, this was done in 2019, it was 18 months before George Floyd and the eruption of the BLM process. I spent a lot of time really thinking about what's going on our planet and in society. And oftentimes I'm able to, I don't know, conjure the jungle drums in a way to create an image or an artwork that is, I don't want to say ahead of its time, but certainly a harbinger of things to come. And I really like to try and keep my personal radar open to really become a sponge of information and culture and politics. And that's where my work comes from. But as you can see in these two pieces, they look like they're from two different artists, but they're from the same artist. People tend to know a Savinar when they see it, not by the kind of imagery, but rather by the content.
Awesome. Thank you, Tad. Before we move into the next part of the conversation, I'll just share a little more about Collecting Forward, which is that the Collecting Forward project is a new initiative by the museum to collect and showcase work by contemporary Jewish artists. This exhibition, Collecting Forward, New Works by Oregon Jewish Artists, is the first exhibition to showcase works found through this new project. And I'm going to put a link in the chat if you want to learn more about the show. And then this recording from tonight will also be posted on that webpage in perpetuity, so enjoy. All right, now I'm going to open the floor up to all of you, and you can kind of pick and choose who wants to go first. But our first discussion question is, what does it mean to you to be a Jewish artist? And specifically to be a Jewish artist working or living or with roots here in Oregon? Who wants to go first? It's a big question. Esther, all right. Can you unmute yourself, Esther? Esther, you're still muted.
Yeah, okay.
There we go.
All right. So, it used to be that I never asked myself that question. But times have changed, and now we live in a very woke environment. So I think that the question for me is, what does it mean to be a Jewish artist in a woke environment? And I was told by my members of my family, particularly, it was drummed into me by my parents that anti-Semitism will happen again, and it will happen here. And I used to think how paranoid they were, and what a homogeneous town I lived in, so lacking in prejudice. But of course, that was a time when everybody was very white, and actually, the economy was quite stable, and international, the international situation was quite different. But now there's a great deal of anti-Semitism. And then, so one is no longer, the question provokes a much more complex set of circumstances and thinking, and it puts one in a kind of conflict. So that's sort of my response. Um, and I may be raising something that is unpolitic, but I'm just going to do it. One example of that in the Portland art world was that whole thing with Froelich and the Jewish Museum. And that was a clear, blatant act of anti-Semitism.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Esther. We're going to hear from some other artists now.
Okay.
I think that it's interesting. I also have never really paid much attention to that thought, but as I sit here, I think that my work has always dealt with my viewers and my community. I mean, every artist does, but I mean, even in the subject matter that it comes from, and I think that I may not be a religious Jew, but I am certainly a member of the community tribe of Jews. And I think that that kind of being embraced by one's community has had an impact on a certain sense of freedom to explore things, but also a healthy kind of Jewish tradition of questioning and debate and argument in the good way, and that has, I think, really fertilized my practice. That just being present in my own Jewish community, the level of interaction and discussion and debate and spirit, I think, had a lot to do with shaping how I view the world, and certainly when there's an injustice, speaking up. So I'd have to look at it that way.
I could follow on that, Tad, if that's okay. I think you said some things that resonated with me, especially about argument and ethics. I grew up in New York City and I moved to Oregon in my 20s, and I've been here on and off ever since. And I was shocked by the differences between New York City culture and Oregon culture. As a Jew who had grown up amongst like argument as conversation. Um, so I think that there's a sort of there's a way in which the question asking part of me that was very nurtured by my observant Jewish upbringing plays into my work as an artist. I'm always interested in the how and the why, and I want to keep pushing on an answer to see where else it leads. I don't really like answers; I like questions, and I think that's to me that's a Jewish quality. Um, I also think that my work is driven heavily by a sense of what does the world need? That sort of tikkun olam idea that was also, in my childhood was a huge part of how I was raised, was to think not so much about what I need, but about what can I do for everyone else, for everything else. And I think that making art as a form of an enactment of ethics is something that I think of as particularly Jewish and something that drives my own work.
I guess I'll follow a little bit about that, just because I also think it's a really complicated question for me. And I do have a sense of my family of origin and a sense of culture. I grew up very much like a Reformed secular Jew. And yes to argument, yes to debate, yes to also humor and skepticism and just being really curious, but also, community care. And I think Danielle, you maybe mentioned the word interdependence, but like those kinds of things, those kinds of values, um, really kind of resonate for me. Um, I don't know about like specific to Portland or to Oregon. It's more people, for me. There's not a huge Jewish community and not a huge uh, Jewish art community. And so, like, this is the first time I'm in sharing exhibition space with a lot of these folks that are here. I've had opportunities to share other contexts with some of you, which to me is really significant. And, I think about like my friend Enie, who's a professor at Pacific University, and thinking about like chosen family, people who are here, in that way. Jack Boas, who's a writer and historian, Danielle and I shared, an academic collegial experience. So this idea of like curiosity and intellectual rigor, something that I really, respect about Danielle. And Tad, you curated me into a public project, at Portland State University. Um, you know, uh, Dana Lynn Lewis, we've sort of kind of done parallel play creatively in our careers for a long time, and there's a lot of respect. So there are those kind of touch points. Barry Pelsner, mensch, and curious and skeptical and all of the magical things. So like those are the things that they're the people and they're like how they embody these kind of values that we're kind of surfacing. Like that's where it lives for me here.
I think there's an automatic, or I'll speak for myself. I feel an automatic kinship whenever I meet somebody who is Jewish. So that's I think kind of a general occurrence, but even more so when you meet a Jewish artist in your own community. There is, from my perspective, um, an awareness of a common trait and a common challenge or battle or survival, if you will. And so I think that is present, regardless of whether there's a large Jewish community or not. I think there is that. So there's a certain ease of that that I'm very appreciative of.
I guess I'll make a few comments. First, with a name like Levy, it's hard to escape being identified as a Jewish artist. Um, so that's um, a place to start. But I found that both in Cincinnati, where I grew up, and in Portland, I never personally experienced any barriers because of being Jewish. But my work didn't necessarily reflect any Jewish motifs. Although in photography, especially in New York, it seems like there was a gold mine of Jewish photographers who were mostly street or advertising photographers. Lee Friedlander, Gary Winogrand, Diane Arbus, Richard Avedon, Irving Penn. These were like the cream of the crop of the New York artists. They were all from immigrant families. They were all struggling and they were all striving to become the top of their profession and their skill base, basically. And um, I was somewhat too shy, maybe, to be photographing street scenes the way they were. And I was more attracted to photographing musicians and photographing more formalistic landscape and architectural things. What I found two things though about being Jewish. One was when I would photograph the Jewish cemeteries, and the first time in Prague, I had a sense of history that I could relate to the imagery more so than just approaching it as a landscape or an object-oriented thing. But second was a a bit of hesitation, and I don't know if paranoia is the right word, of wandering around alone in a foreign atmosphere as a Jewish person. And I had different experiences. In Prague, I actually felt welcomed after some initial suspicious things on my part that turned out to be meaningless. And in Morocco, I was also um, treated in a very friendly way. Although right now, I'm not sure that there are many places that I would like to go to that I could, or at least that I would feel safe traveling to. And traveling is a large part of my photographic experience. Um, so it's having the cultural knowledge of Judaism um, is always in my background, but it's not always in the foreground of what I'm photographing.
Oh, Esther, you're
I'd
still
like to,
muted.
yes, just a moment. I'd like to respond. I feel like I was, not to be controversial, a bit cut off. Um, it is a very, we're all very polite because I guess we're all from Portland, but, or live here. But the truth is, this is a, this is a moment in history in which the rise of anti-Semitism, um, is, is obvious. And it's irrelevant to me to really talk about being a Jewish artist because I live in New York and everybody's a Jewish artist here, or almost everybody. Um, but it is a period uh, in which uh, it really should be noted and discussed because it's really important. And I don't want to get into a discussion of Israel. I'm no friend of Netanyahu, but I think it is. I think it is a crucial topic. And Stu, I understand what you're saying. I mean, um, I don't know if you would want to wander around a Jewish cemetery in Lodz, Poland, alone. You know,
Yeah,
so
or thinking of, I had thought about going to Israel, and right now would not be the time. I would love to photograph in Turkey, in Egypt, and I just don't know that it's the right time. I think I would still feel safe in Morocco, um, but it's weird times, and I say that from this aspect of I usually photograph alone. I wander around alone. I'm not in a group, and it's I even though I'm a decent sized person, I do feel a little vulnerable, especially lugging around 30 pounds of camera equipment.
I'll just
I, I mean, I would agree. I'm working on a number of things in this studio that are, somehow trying to respond to the immediacy of Gaza and Israel and other atrocities. It's certainly not something that happens overnight, but I agree. This is a time um, for artists to rise to the occasion to express their emotions and their observations of what they consider to be unjust. And you know, but I don't have anything to show you.
oh, it's
Have a
okay.
I mean, I'm working on it. It's on the walls, but I don't have a finished piece. But I do think, and I think that for me as an artist, that's what my practice is reporting on the now, and some artists choose to be more ethereal. Some artists are interested in the intellectual qualities of abstract expressionism. There's a whole range. I don't think everybody automatically is an artist that's going to comment on Gaza. Um,
Yeah.
but I would assume that we will shortly see plays and films in the next few years that address this directly. If we don't see revivals of things from before, it takes time, but certainly people should be expressing their whatever their concerns or thoughts are. And different people do it in different ways.
I'll just add one quick thing, Esther. I appreciate your New Yorkerness and directness. As someone who still feels like a New Yorker after 25 years in Portland. And I think that for me, this time period is every single person I know who has any sort of connection to Judaism is acutely aware of it. And that wasn't the case 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And I don't know that I'm going to there's certainly parts of me that are very scared. Half of my practice is writing, and I have a book coming out that's very Jewish, and I am terrified of that book coming out because it's very Jewish. And I wouldn't have felt that a few years ago. So there's that, but I'm also really curious about what this awareness of what it means to be Jewish, how that will impact the work that people are making. And I agree with you, Tad, that like if anyone's making work right now from, from a place of self-awareness, which I hope we all are, any artist, it's if you have a connection to Judaism, it's going to show up. And I'm not saying that anti-Semitism is a positive force, but it is sort of, I think, forcing a cultural confrontation in this country that maybe didn't exist before.
Yeah, thank you all. It's certainly a conversation that we're having here at the museum. And we go back and forth as well about what makes Jewish art Jewish art. Is it that the artist is Jewish? Is it that the subject is Jewish? And here we don't take a stand really either way. Several of your pieces that you all have submitted to the exhibition really have nothing to do with Jewish content, and then others do. And so I did want to just pose a question, if you didn't already touch on it, of do either of those identities, either Jewish or Oregonian, factor into your artistic practice or how you approach the mediums that you work with? If they don't, then that's totally fine because they don't have to be Jewish art or for you to be a Jewish artist. But if they do, I would just love if you all could share.
Well, mine might be the easiest in that I still have interest in some of the more historical aspects of Jewish cemeteries, and it may extend to more Jewish institutions, but I haven't fully explored that. It's sort of on my to-do list. But that's the main um, interaction of photography and Judaism for me in Portland. I've been here 50 years. I feel very Oregonian now, and I'm so glad that I'm here as opposed to where I was from originally. Um, and and I do think more about Oregon as far as my photography and landscape. But again, there is the curiosity about the Jewish interaction of Portland that I do plan to explore more. And some of my mentors in photography who I um, met in Portland, Bill Galen and Arnold Rustin, were both Jewish, and they were very influential on my path and introducing me to other photographers and philosophies. So it's an interesting community. Um, and the photo community in Portland is very small and somewhat tight knit, and and so there's a lot of interaction that way. And I'm not sure that any particular aspects of Judaism come out of that, but again, there is a community there that I think is analogous to um, to the Jewish community and to every other community that we are in as individuals, whether it relates to our arts or professions or whatever.
I was involved in the creation of the Oregon Holocaust Memorial, along with John Larson and many others, Paul Sutton. And, very early on in the creation of that memorial, we started talking amongst ourselves that we didn't want to follow the path of abusive memorials. So many memorials feel like you have to experience the pain that somebody else went through, and the horrors in a physical way. And actually, our project ended up, in one of the most cherished parks in the city, in a very sylvan setting, amongst, a giant cedar tree and flowers and lawns and all of that, and was a very, very the project was based on dissolution of the family, not the 6 million. The entire thrust of the piece was about family, and something bad happened to family. We wanted it to be teachable to kindergartners, and there's a condition where the artists created something that was very unlike anything you would ever see in any other major city. Um, and so I wonder how much the natural environment that we live in here in Portland and the sense of that easy community, small but tight, um, actually infuse that design. And so what I'm kind of talking about, how different it is to be an artist, a Jewish artist in Oregon, than it is a Jewish artist in New York. And what are those influences? It's less about market here, and it's more about peers and humanity from my perspective. And so that memorial never would have come out of New York, ever. Wouldn't have come out of Chicago or in San Francisco or anything like that. It was very indigenous. And so I think that we have here a little spin on kind of how the environment and our community actually can affect the work we do. And maybe that's why Esther is first and forefront about the anti-Semitism, and we acknowledge it, we know it, we see it, but we may be processing it in a different way. I have no answers.
Well, it's hard to know how anybody processes anything. The memorial, I think, is extremely important to the community, and it's a beautiful memorial. And I think I beg to differ. I think it could have come out of anywhere. I agree with you. I think what is remarkable about it is, of course, the setting and the beauty of the setting. It was also extremely hard. I don't mean to be a downer. Maybe that's a Jewish thing, but it was also very hard to have that established in the community. People didn't want it in Washington Park.
10 years. We worked on it for 10 years.
Oh, yeah. And congratulations. It's a real accomplishment.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. People didn't want it, but the people who didn't want it lived across the street. It wasn't like a community outpouring of we don't want it. It was a couple of people who were going to, from their front porch, were going to look into the memorial, even though we screened the whole thing, but it was that's where the rub came from.
Yeah. I'm sure you know more about it than I do.
No, but it was a long thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sort of following different threads here, but I do think that the recent events, it's not an option, to dismiss or minimize what's going on, how you as a Jewish person are associated or emblematic of that in some way. And it's way more complex than a kind of flattened kind of perspective that I think we are all kind of experiencing in different ways. And so it is really vulnerable. It's really complicated. It's really hard to answer questions. It's really hard, in a professional context in academia to navigate these conversations, to expect or understand, what people may or may not know about and what responsibility we have as educators, as artists, as community members to, inform, to unpack, to whatever. It's messy right now. And I think that's it's dynamic and it's like it can be really fertile and all this creatively and for change making and opening things up and evolving. But it's also really fraught. And that has to be acknowledged.
Um, I'll just add one thing, and I agree with so much of what has been said, that specifically about Oregon, having grown up in a very urban environment where I was surrounded by many, many Holocaust survivors. It was a challenging environment in multiple ways. And to come to Oregon as a young woman, um, the word is overused, but I really do think of Oregon as a very healing place, like the actual weather and the light and the trees and the water and the seasons. Like it's a there's certainly aspects of this place that are ferocious, but it's sort of a gentle place to land in. Much gentler than New York City, gentler than Forest Hills, where I grew up. So it's I think that every all of the other things being true, not to discredit or draw attention away from those. I also think that there's a way in which I came to Oregon and I stayed here because it felt like what my body and mind needed based on like my Jewish inheritance, which is, specific to me, but not that, not that unique amongst Jews who immigrated to this country right after the war. So yeah, I'll just add that tidbit.
Okay, thank you all so much. I want to just throw in one last question. Doesn't look like our audience has too many questions for you, but some of you have touched a little bit on what's coming up for you. But if anybody wants to share like what you're working on next or some new works that are coming out, how else can we stay involved with your art practice? Danielle, you said you have a book coming out. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
All right, I could say a little more about that. The book is called Protocols, and it is an erasure poem made out of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. So I took the text, which I imagine most of you are familiar with, and I got rid of most of the words and created a poem from that text that it has nothing to do with the content of the original, actually sort of completely inverts the messages of the original document. And then the second half of the book is an essay about the book and its history and its role in the world and in my life. So that will be out from Iron Press in June, which is a really wonderful press run by a bunch of young, really brilliant Jews.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share about some upcoming work or some themes you see yourself working with going forward? I know Tad, you'd also touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, my last show was 3 years ago, and that dealt with kind of the period leading up to COVID and during COVID, and the show prior to that, 4 years earlier, was about Trump's first presidency, or some of the impacts of his presidency. And oddly enough, that show was supposed to happen at the Jewish Museum. But because of COVID, the exhibition was canceled. Jordan Schnitzer picked it up, and we had it at the Eon exhibition space with people with masks and everything. But I went back to the Jewish Museum just recently and say, hey, I had a show. It was supposed to happen, but you canceled it. That's fine. COVID is different, whatever. But I still would like to have the show that we had scheduled. And so I just found out this week that I am going to have a small show at the museum. We don't have a date yet. I don't know when they're doing the scheduling. So, and I'm sure that will be something that is a response to the times we are in this moment. Because that's generally how I work. So, I don't know what it is, but I would assume it would go something in that direction. I've been doing a lot of little small prints about climate change and what we're going to lose in a graphic way, kind of just almost striking things out. And so maybe that'll find a way into that show. I don't know.
Great. We're looking forward to having you back here then.
Yeah.
I guess I have this urge to just be really scrappy right now and to have immediacy and to have some ways of putting things out in the world, whether it's like Xeroxes or zines, or there's something kind of like, I don't know. I mean, you all saw the drawings that I'm kind of doing in conjunction with the work on the sculptures, and it's just a feeling I have, and I don't want it to be on a screen. I want it to be in people's hands or in physical spaces, but I don't want preciousness, but I want, something that has a lot of, I guess, feeling and power and empowerment. And I don't know, I'm rambling because this is all in a very generative and raw state. And I'm just like, I just need to keep making through this period. That's something I talked with another artist about. It's like during the last Trump administration, it was, maybe we should be doing community work. Maybe, like it's not time to make art, but it's like, it's always time to make art. It's not an either or proposition. So I'm not exactly sure where this is going, but I'm feeling those things.
I'll put in my 2 cents worth. I'm thinking of resurrecting my grid portrait project in the digital realm, whereas it had always been with 4x5 film and big strobes before. But I'm always looking for new places to go as far as my landscape work. But this year has been sort of an introspective year of looking back at my work and trying to dig into my archives. I had a couple of semi-retrospective shows, one in Cincinnati, one in Astoria. But I feel like I need to dig into my early archives and see what I never had time to really look at before. And that's one of my projects for the next year or so.
I have just one piece that's part of it's going to be in a show at the Portland Art Museum about diaspora, people who come from other places. And the piece was already acquired by the museum, but I'm glad that it's going to be exhibited. I'm excited about it. And I've been working on this series for a long time, cigar boxes, paintings on these very small found objects that are cigar box lids. And I had an example of it, but somehow it wasn't shown. And I've been continuing to work on that along with these shape pieces I'm working on, and hoping that they'll be shown somewhere here in New York.
If I can jump in for a second, I was
Yeah.
just told that there's going to be an exhibit at the Portland Art Museum around their Monet painting that includes various garden things. And I was told that one of my photographs from the Japanese gardens will be included in that exhibit. So sometime this spring, I think.
Oh, I hope to make it out there and see that show.
Yeah, these all sound like such exciting projects, and Emily, can't wait to see where you do land when you start making. Awesome. Thank you all so much. This has been a really interesting discussion. And again, I hope if you haven't seen the show yet, you get on down here before it closes this Sunday on January 12th. I'll just do a quick little plug, as Amber put in the chat. Just a reminder that this program was recorded and it's going to be on our website next week, so you can watch it in perpetuity. And we do hope to see you at one of our future events. We are going to be having a book talk here on Zoom on Wednesday, January 22nd. And then we're having a film screening here at our museum in the auditorium for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. That's going to be on Thursday, January 30th. And the film festival coming back in full force next month. So stay tuned for more. And Amber put the link to the calendar in the chat if you want to see what we're up to. We'd love to have you all back again. And thank you to all of the fabulous artists again. You're all so wonderful. And it's been such a joy to have your work here in the museum and to have it in our collection as well, so that we get to enjoy it and that our visitors and our community get to enjoy it for generations to come.
Thank you. And thank Amber too.
Well, thank you all.
Everybody.
Thank you all. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night.